This is Hietaniemi Cemetery in Helsinki. This is the final resting place of the composer of a masterpiece of romantic choral music that you've probably never heard of. In late Romantic choral music, there are certain key works that you have to know about if you're involved with choral music in a serious way. And even if you have only a casual acquaintance with the genre, you may recognize their names. This canon of masterpieces includes Friede auf Erden by Arnold Schönberg, Der Abend by Richard Strauss, and in sacred music, The All-Night Vigil of Sergei Rachmaninoff, and The Mass for Double Choir by Swiss composer Frank Martin. But what I'd like to talk about here is an equally ambitious work of late Romantic a cappella choral music that is almost unknown outside of Finland. This is all the more remarkable when we consider that it was written by a composer whose choral writing was quite advanced compared to what his colleagues here in the north were doing, and well on a par with the most ambitious choral music being created in Central Europe. This composer is Toivo Kuula. He is one of the big four Finnish national romantic composers, and of all the four he was the most ambitious, not least in the field of choral music. Indeed, it is widely agreed that he could have become a serious rival to Sibelius himself, had his life not been cut short at an early age. The remarkable career and tragic death of Toivo Kuula deserve a closer look. But first, a brief background to describe the context in which Kuula wrote his music. Finland was captured by Russia from Sweden in 1809 and was part of the Russian Empire for over a century. This was arguably the best thing that could have happened to Finland because, thanks to an enlightened Tsar and skillful politics, Finland was created an autonomous Grand Duchy. This meant, for instance, that Finland had her own laws inherited from the Swedish era, and Finland was now recognized as a nation among nations. For most of the 19th century, Finland grew and prospered, but the rise of nationalism in Europe led to parallel developments that were to have profound consequences. Nationalism in Finland led to a rise of national self-esteem. Finnish language and culture came to be regarded as having high merit, and Finland was increasingly regarded as distinct from Russia, although there was as yet no talk of independence. Nationalism in Russia, meanwhile, led to the imperial government attempting to bring Finland into line with the rest of the empire and to erode Finland's autonomy. As a result, a largely non-violent resistance movement emerged in Finland. This came to involve the arts too, leading to an immensely productive period that we now refer to as the Golden Age of Finnish art, with numerous prominent achievements in literature, music, visual arts, and architecture. Rising national feeling and resentment against Russian rule eventually led to a desire for independence. And when the Russian Revolution broke out amidst the turmoil of the First World War in 1917, Finland saw her chance and declared independence. Here's a fun fact. The likewise new Bolshevik government of Russia was the first to recognize Finland's independence. Almost immediately after this, Finland plunged into a brutal civil war between the German-minded Whites and the Russian-minded Reds. After a few months of fierce fighting, the Reds were defeated in spring 1918, and Finland became a Western Republic. So, remember all that? Good. Let's move on to the man himself. Toivo Kuula was born in 1883. He was nearly 20 years younger than the big daddy of Finnish national romantic composers, Jean Sibelius, and he was actually one of Sibelius's students for a while at the Helsinki Music Institute. Kuula's talent was recognized at an early age, and he created a successful career as a composer and conductor. Kuula came from Ostrobothnia, a region of Finland whose natives are known for their arrogance, stubbornness, and short temper. I'll read that again. Whose natives are known for their determination, pride, and strong sense of honor. But it is no exaggeration to say that for Kuula, this content of character is what eventually killed him. Kuula was a supporter of the whites in the Civil War, but he lived in Viipuri, a city that was occupied by the Reds until liberation and victory in late April 1918. It was at a victory celebration, where much drink had been consumed, that Kuula got into a violent argument with some white soldiers and ended up being shot in the head. He lingered for a couple of weeks and died on the 18th of May, 1918. Despite his career lasting less than 2 decades, Kuula wrote an impressive amount of music in various genres: solo songs, chamber music, vocal works, and orchestral miniatures. He never ventured into opera or extensive orchestral works, although he was planning a symphony at the time of his death. Given the size and the quality of his output, one can only wonder what he would have achieved had he lived to an advanced age. But he did manage to create one of the most ambitious a cappella choral works of the Romantic period. If we look at what national romantic art is all about, it would be easy to imagine that this discovery of the identity of a young nation, an exploration of its very soul, would be completely closed to outside influences. But nothing could be further from the truth. The artists of the golden age of Finnish art were incredibly cosmopolitan. Although they did find inspiration in Finland's landscape and Finnish folk tradition, they absorbed international influences like sponges. That's not all that they absorbed like sponges, but that's another story. It was a must for Finnish artists to travel to the continent to study and just generally to take in the atmosphere. Sibelius, for instance, studied in Vienna and Berlin and later spent time in Italy. Paris was a favorite destination for painters and musicians alike. It was to Paris that Toivo Kuula went to study composition in 1909, and it is in Paris that our story begins. Hold it! Before we get to Paris, we need to introduce one more person. Heikki Klemetti was the most prominent figure in Finnish choral music for the entire first half of the 20th century. He was a choir conductor who commissioned and championed up-and-coming composers such as Kuula and Madetoja. Klemetti was a true Renaissance man. Besides being a composer himself, he was a critic, an author, and an administrator, and he took an interest in an astonishing variety of topics, from traditional church architecture to ski design. By the year 1909, Klemetti had already commissioned a couple of well-received choral pieces from Kuula, and when Kuula went to Europe to study, Klemetti asked him to write an extensive polyphonic a cappella choral work. And, as I said, it is in Paris that our story begins. Actually, that's not quite true. Kuula spent most of the year 1909 traveling in Europe, and he had already been working on the new piece while staying in Italy and Germany. But it was in Paris that he completed a version of the work finished enough to show to his composition teacher there, Marcel L'Abbé. L'Abbé marvelled at the piece, but declared that no choir would ever be able to perform it. Kuula, rather smugly, replied that he already had such a choir in Finland. Unfortunately, Kuula was overstating his case. The choir for which Klemetti had commissioned the piece was the Suomen Laulu Mixed Choir, and Kuula, being away from home, had no way of knowing just how limited the resources available to the choir were at the time. It was as if he were building a house on inspiration alone without looking at the budget. Clementi must have been horrified to receive the score, judging by the correspondence between the two of them.
Thank you for Hymn of the Sea. It is very good, but you will be obliged to amend it somewhat if you intend it to be performed. Our choir will not be able to cope with it because of the high and low extremities of the range.
That which comes from my heart, and which I have committed to paper, I shall never alter, and neither shall anyone else.
You can write in 7 horned devils for all I care, and I'll perform the damn thing, as long as you don't hang them up dangling from the rafters. Else I shall be obliged to edit it as I see fit.
It is quite distasteful to me to have to alter it, especially since I feel that so much richness will be lost. But the high soprano parts I shall not touch, since I know that a high B is a relatively easy task for the human voice.
We simply cannot sing it, except a whole tone lower, and what will the basses do then? Never mind the polyphonic challenges. The fact of the matter is that if you do not rewrite it, then no one else shall ever sing it.
I have bowed to your prodigious will, and made certain changes, which I have never done for any man except my teacher, and will never do again.
As you might be able to tell, Clementi was also from Ostrobothnia. The changes that Kuula eventually made were not very substantial, and the piece remained a daunting challenge. Clementi was eventually obliged to include an instrumental accompaniment for Suomen laulu to be able to perform the piece at all, and the premiere was a patchy affair by all accounts. Critics were agreed that it was impossible to judge the merits of the piece on the basis of that performance.
I did my best, and performed your shameless piece, Hymn of the Sea. How did it go? You'll have to ask those of my enemies, who are nevertheless honest men.
Clementi performed Meren virsi a number of times, always with accompaniment. But even though Kuula's colleague, Leevi Madetoja, even wrote an arrangement of it for choir and orchestra, it soon sank into obscurity. It was not until the 1970s that it was rediscovered by choir conductor Harald Andersen, and since then it has been performed with some regularity. It is still a big sing, but well within the capabilities of a reasonably good choir. So what exactly is this piece that caused such grief to the long-suffering Clementi? Let's take a look.
Eino Leino is one of the most celebrated poets in the Finnish language. He was a national romantic, but folklore was only one of his sources of inspiration. His interests included mythology, metaphysics, and symbolism, and he was widely read in world literature. Hymn of the Sea is one of a set of 4 poems celebrating the 4 classical elements. It was published in the collection Halla in 1908, so it was very new when Kuula decided to set it to music. Hymn of the Sea begins with the often used image of rivers flowing into the sea as a metaphor for human souls becoming one with the universe. The main body of the poem is a contemplation of the sea as a reflection of eternity and the transitory nature of human life. The poem is divided into sections that Kuula follows quite faithfully in his setting, although he omits part of the text.
Whither art thou rushing, O swift stream? Whither art thou surging, O roaring rapids? To the sea, we hurry to the sea. If you bar our path, we will break that bar. Whither art thou going, O blithe spirit? Where is thy destiny, O mortal one? I wish to melt into that which is greater. I long for eternity. Wave follows upon wave. The song of the sea is endless, like the very force of creation, like the cycle of death and life. Many had dreams in their youth, but then came the reality of adulthood, singing the harsh song of nature, speaking stern words, shortening the days, darkening the nights, casting shadows across their path, pressing laurels onto their brow and laying them down to rest in their time. But I choose not to give up. I could bear the terrors of death. not mind if I moulder in the ground and waste away, or am struck down in the midst of my labours, if I only knew that my soul will survive, though I walk upon the shores of death. Then I could row to the distant shore, where the rushes gently glow. I would speak the word, and the maiden of death could come and collect this bold man, and take me beyond the pains of life, beyond all mundane cares and burdens, and I would not be sad to go. I would gaze upon those slowly receding waves, watching the silvery wake behind the boat shine brightly and then disappear. Futile thought, futile dream, I shall vanish like a bubble on the foam. The sea remains, endless, islandless, an ineffable holiness. Evidently it is too large for me. Evidently I am too small for the sea, because I am afraid to rage with the storm, to ride the beating gale, to spring up in a spray of pearls to the clouds, to plunge down into the abyss. Whither art thou rushing, O swift stream? Whither art thou surging, O roaring rapids? I wish to melt into that which is greater. I long for eternity.
Kuula's treatment of this text is rhapsodic. There are some recurring elements, but no real sense of an overarching structure. In technical terms, the centerpiece is the double fugue that comes early on, juxtaposing the endless song of the sea with the cycle of human life. But this is followed by three further increasingly great climaxes, firstly highlighting the imagined voyage of the soul across the sea, and then marveling at the vastness of the sea against which the narrator feels far too small. At the end, Kuula repeats lines from the beginning of the poem, and in the coda spins out the notion of eternity into a hopeful conclusion.
Kuula was an impulsive person, and many of his compositions are passionate and heartfelt. Admittedly, in Meren virsi, his inspiration may have run a bit too high, but in a way we have to be happy that he refused to give in to Clementi's demands and compress the piece to suit the capabilities of the choir at hand. Because the end result is, for me, one of the finest essays in a cappella choral writing from the Romantic period. Kuula's output as a whole deserves to be much more widely known, and the fact that most of his vocal works are in Finnish does not need to be an obstacle. Finnish is easy to pronounce and gratifying to sing, and if you've ever sung anything in Latin, you're more than halfway there already. And as proof positive that the language barrier can be overcome, here is a French choir singing Meren virsi by Toivo Kuula. Thanks for watching. Good day.
Meren